What's up, guys? Good morning. Hopefully, you're all having an awesome day. So, today is the 15th of April 2025. And today's a big day for everybody associated with Liverpool Football Club because today is the 36th anniversary of the Hillsborough tragedy in which 96, now 97 fans lost their life. So 96 died on the day, and then years later another fan who had been left with permanent brain damage passed away. And it was ruled in court that he was the 97th victim of the Hillsborough tragedy. Obviously, it's a horrible thing to think about what happened that day, and the lives that were lost that day. Obviously, it's a day where you think about the victims, you think about their families, and how hard it must be, every year when this day comes around, knowing it was the anniversary of the day that their loved ones went to a football match and never came home. Because these days, that's strictly unheard of. Like, you never ever think that you're gonna go to a football, you're gonna go to a football match and not come home. And those fans that day that went to the Liverpool game, that went to that match at Hillsborough, wouldn't have had any reason to believe they weren't gonna come home. They went to that match thinking they were gonna watch the game and come home again. But sadly they didn't. 96 of them lost their lives in a way that they never needed to. And I always think it's sad that that incident was blamed on drunken Liverpool supporters. Because we know that it was nothing to do with Liverpool fans. We know it wasn't their fault that happened. The sole blame lies entirely at the feet of David Duckenfield. He was the one who was to blame for that. So, before I go any further, I am going to do just a 2-minute silence to remember those that lost their lives. And I am going to start that now. I'm going to get my Alexa to start a timer for 2 minutes, and then we'll carry on with the video. So, Alexa, start timer for 2 minutes.
Good morning, Perry. 2 minutes, starting now.
That's it. Stop. So that is my 2 minute silence completed. So I just wanted to thought that'd be a nice little thing to do, just to pay my respects to those that died at Hillsborough and remember the lives of the people that were lost, remember the lives of the people who died, and remember the lives that were lost, on that day, and obviously the 97th fan, obviously, he died years later as well. Obviously, like it's when I see the pictures of Hillsborough, of Hillsborough and everything, it's just so eerie and scary to look at those pictures, knowing what people went through, knowing how, I can't imagine how scared people must have felt, you know, after witnessing, obviously those people that died must have must have felt like they must have been, people must have been so scared and so, like, they must have been terrified, frightened, it was just horrible to think that something like that had happened. Is it the worst disaster we've had in football? Like, I'd say it's one of the worst. I'm not sure if it's actually the worst tragedy we've had. Obviously the Munich air disaster was pretty bad, but you've got to think about the fact that, there weren't as many people who lost their lives in that than there were at Hillsborough, obviously, 96. Now 97, of course. You know, the fact that that's what's so sad about it. It's the fact that such a large number of fans lost their life. We're not talking a situation where 10, 15 people lost their lives. 96 people lost their lives. Obviously, one man was left with permanent brain damage, and he died a few years ago. And as I said, the courts ruled that he should be the 97th. The decision was made. It was ruled in court that he would be named as the 97th victim of Hillsborough, which I think is pretty fair for him to be ruled as the 97th victim. I think that was, fairly appropriate. I think, it's hard not to feel, awful for for those that lost, people in that tragedy. It must have been so scary for the families, of people who went to the match that day. As obviously they would have been seeing, everything that had happened, seeing it on TV, seeing what was going on, and, not knowing if their loved ones were okay, or, were hurt or whatever. It's just, yeah, man, it must have been so hard for those that got that phone call to say, they've died and their loved ones have died, and it wasn't just adults who died in that accident. Young people, teenagers, were killed in that accident, were killed in that incident as well. I can't quite remember how young how young the oldest victim was. How old the the youngest victim was. It's just so as I said, these days, I think something like something like the Hillsborough tragedy would be very unlikely to happen. I don't think that, it's something that would happen nowadays. I think, thankfully, things are a lot better these days. I think, as I said, you never really think that your loved ones are gonna go to a football match and, never come home again. And the families of those who died at Hillsborough, they would have felt the same way. They would have had no reason to believe their loved ones were gonna go to the match that day and not come home. They would have had no reason to believe that that tragedy was gonna occur and that their loved ones were gonna lose their lives. And I think we all know that Hillsborough, the events of what happened at Hillsborough that day were events that should never have happened. and probably could have been avoided and probably could have been prevented as well. But obviously, you can't go back and change what happened. You can't go back and bring those people back. But all you can do is remember those people and honour their lives. And the 97 people who lost their lives as a result of Hillsborough, they will never be forgotten. Their memories will forever live on. You know, they they will never ever be forgotten. I can guarantee that. You know, I hope that I hope they are resting in peace. The night, all those fans, and I hope their families. My thoughts with their families today, as I imagine that for their families, this is obviously undoubtedly an extremely hard day for them, and I can't imagine how the pain they must be feeling right now. It's awful, absolutely awful, and this that pain. It's not a pain that I would wish on anyone. As I said, seeing the pictures, I've seen so many pictures online of the Hillsborough tragedy. Seeing all of those fans. They must have been in so much pain. Not able to breathe. They must have been scared. As I said, they must have been so terrified and scared and frightened. Well, I think anyone would be, terrified and scared and frightened if they were in that kind of situation. And it's not a situation that anyone ever deserves to be in. You should, no one ever deserved to be in that situation. It was something that, I mean, obviously, you know, I think it's always out. I think, the way, I mean, I'm a United fan, but I still feel like even though I'm a United fan, it's still the right thing to do to obviously remember the Liverpool fans who died at Hillsborough and do a minute silence or whatever, a couple of little 2 minute silence, to remember those who lost their lives. I feel like it's a respectful thing to do, even if you're a Chelsea fan, an Everton fan, a Tottenham fan, a Fulham fan. It doesn't matter what team you support. It's always nice to pay your respects and remember those innocent lives that were lost 30 odd years ago, and obviously, the fan, the 97th fan who died, years later. And obviously, remember all of those, and it's those people that we remember today. It's those people whose lives that we honour today, and it's their families that we think of today because obviously their family, this day for all of their families is going to be probably the toughest day they'll ever have to deal with. I think this day will probably always be that painful reminder for them of what they've lost, and the events of and I think for the survivors as well. Like it must be every time this day comes around, it must be a painful reminder for them of the fact that they were one of those people who were actually lucky enough to survive, whilst so many other people didn't. I often wonder, like, I imagine that a lot of the people that survived that were probably left with survivor's guilt because obviously they survived and so many other fans didn't survive. They got out of that situation. They wrote, hey, but 96 people, 96, now 97 other people didn't. Some people were left with life changing injuries, some people were dead, were left, some people were killed. 96 people, 97 people were killed, and it's just horrible, horrible situation, and I don't think we'll ever see something like that ever happen again, and I hope we never do. It's just it was such a tragic event to happen, and yeah. So I thought I would do this little video today to start off the day. I felt this would be a nice way to start off the day by honouring the lives of the Liverpool of the 97 who died at as a result of the events of Hillsborough. Obviously on the 15th of April 1989, today obviously marks 36 years, lest we forget. They will never be forgotten, that's for sure, I guarantee you that. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'll see you for another one soon. Bye bye.